You're listening to Scaling Impact, the #1 podcast for conscious entrepreneurs changing the world. Today on the Scaling Impact podcast, I talk with Jason Silva. Jason is an Emmy-nominated TV personality, filmmaker, keynote speaker, and futurist. He's best known as the host of 2 huge TV series on the National Geographic Channel, Brain Games, as well as Origins. And the place I first encountered Jason was on his wildly successful YouTube show, Shots of Awe. That's AWE. In this episode, Jason and I deep dive into the inner workings of flow state, what it is, unique and reliable ways to access it, and how it can provide profound effects on the mind of an entrepreneur. We also cover the power of being able to hold 2 seemingly opposing views in mind at the same time, as well as how looking to nature can give us a deeper understanding of the latest evolving technologies. Interesting points covered are switching from conscious processing to unconscious processing, why we are deeply attracted to things that violate our expectations, the hippie speedball formula for getting into flow state that Jason talks about, how looking to nature can help us understand new technology, and collective consciousness, why when one person is on the verge of a technological breakthrough, a handful of others around the world are on that same edge. All right, so thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, thanks James.
Glad to jump over to New York, not about an hour and a half quick flight from Toronto, so easy to kind of pop in. It's like our backyard internationally.
Exactly.
We have a few things I want to talk about.
Great.
I haven't given you too much heads up, so I'm hoping we can kind of spitball it.
Okay.
So just to start off with a fun question. I know your cinematography background, you have amazing videos. What's the role of the filmmaker in influencing the viewer?
Well, the filmmaker is stewarding the viewer's consciousness, right? I've always felt that good media, whether it's a 3-minute film or a 2-hour film, is patterning your consciousness through a kind of patterned sequence of imagery, words, and music in a way that real life cannot compete with. What I love about succumbing to a piece of media is that I'm basically surrendering to the filmmaker's magic carpet ride. I'm surrendering my agency, which is something that I don't do very often because I treasure my sense of agency. But if it's a compelling piece of content, if it's a compelling filmmaker, there is nothing more gratifying than surrendering agency and saying, take my awareness for a ride, pattern my consciousness, jolt my sense of self, crack me open a little bit. And that's, so I try to do that to my viewers. I remember once talking to Stephen Kotler from the Flow Genome Project about the rapid fire editing style of my videos, particularly because they're short form videos that compete for people's attention on small screens, people watching content on their smartphones for the most part. And so my videos are very frenetic, and the imagery typically is kind of an assault on the senses. And what Stephen Kotler said to me is that working memory can only process about 3 or 4 items in mind at once. Can only hold 3 or 4 items in mind at once. But when you overwhelm working memory by assaulting them with a multiplicity of ideas and images in a fast-paced manner, like way more than 3 or 4 items in mind at once, what happens is you switch from conscious processing to unconscious processing, which can hold many, many, many more items in mind at once. But the sort of side effect of switching to unconscious processing is that you're now in an altered state as a viewer. So you've occasioned an altered state of consciousness experience in the viewer, which is highly gratifying for me because it means I've put people in a trance. And if I've effectively put people in a trance, then I can really get in there. The ideas can really get in there.
Wow, I'd never actually thought about that. I didn't know that was the case with getting into the unconscious. As a futurist strategist, when I watch movies, I'm actually doing exactly what you're saying we're supposed to do, and people find it very strange. They say, like, don't you see what's coming? Like, how did you not see that coming? And I say, I try to avoid that. I don't want to see what's coming.
Correct.
I just try to get in there and let them take me for the walkthrough.
Which is very hard to do, especially if you've watched a lot of films and you're familiar with film tropes and editing techniques and the tricks that filmmakers use, or if you're familiar with the pattern behind most stories, the Joseph Campbell incredible monomyth, the hero's journey. Too much knowledge, I believe, can get in the way of appreciating a compelling story, in the sense of it can get in the way of a fully immersive experience. A fully immersive experience is the kind that takes you for a ride, takes you for a whirl. And I want to be transported. So I've hung out with a lot of actors who tell me they can't enjoy films because they're like judging the performance. They're seeing little cracks in the facade, so to speak. And if you think of a film like a beautiful jigsaw puzzle, if you have a mind that is too trained to see the separate pieces, you're gonna see all the ways in which the jigsaw puzzle comes together. Like, you're gonna see all the lines in the jigsaw puzzle. I'm less interested in the lines in the jigsaw puzzle and more interested in the whole. I want to see something that is greater than the sum of the parts. I want to have the whole experience, and that requires a suspension of disbelief. Or to go even further, Janet Murray, in her book on immersion and storytelling called Hamlet on the Holodeck, says it's more than just a suspension of disbelief on the part of the viewer. It's actively metabolizing belief. So it's like saying, like, this is reality, I'm present, I'm achieving a sense of presence in this story, I'm identifying with the character's POV, I'm assuming the viewpoint of the character, and I only know what he knows. And I'm in it for the ride. Like, I fully embrace this fictional reality, or not. And so, yeah, there's an intention required there, so as not to be cynical and look for the flaws and the cracks, you know?
Yeah, and the present seems to be that wormhole to infinite possibility, in a sense.
Yeah.
And it seems like the only place where you can hold flow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that Michael Pollan writes in his book, How to Change Your Mind, which is about using psychedelics for psychotherapy purposes, and I'm sure that the guys behind Flow States, and Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel, would agree, is that what we're really looking for are experiences that violate our expectations. Michael Pollan says it beautifully. He says that the brain essentially is a prediction machine, like a computer, like an algorithm. It works like an artificial intelligence program. It's trying to predict the future all the time. We do this automatically. And so that was a way originally of us like surviving. You know, it's like assessing situations, what might happen so that we can mitigate against risk. But because the brain is a prediction machine, it makes us rely on a set of algorithms that are always, again, trying to assess what's about to happen before it happens. And so we live in a kind of perpetual future tense, a kind of low-level hum of anxiety. And in his words, the good news is I'm seldom surprised. The bad news is I'm seldom surprised. But it's only when something violates our expectations, when we achieve a kind of an experience that, what he says, blocks all signals forwards and backwards, and that can be intense novelty. It can be an altered state of consciousness induced by like drugs, you know, if you're microdosing or if you're taking cannabis, or taking a trip somewhere, a journey to somewhere really unfamiliar. These experiences, they block our signals forwards and backwards. So they block the brain's capacity to consciously or unconsciously predict what's about to happen. And they block the brain's capacity to compare what's happening with the past as well. And so you entered what he calls the flow of the present. And that is literally wonderful. Wonder being a byproduct of that unencumbered sense of first sight. And a sense of first sight, like you're seeing it for the first time, but you're like at the edge of the frontier of what's known. Like you're seeing a sense of first sight unencumbered by knowingness, unencumbered by an assumption that you know what's going to happen next. And that's the beautiful moment, because when your expectations have been violated, all of a sudden you're thrown into a place where you don't know what's going to happen. So you're fully present, your senses are heightened, you're fully engaged, you're fully aroused, and it offers a state beyond boredom and anxiety, like full flow, full presence, full mindful here and now, which is an enigmatic state for human beings, you know. We rarely are here and now. Most of the time we leapfrog from here and now and we go straight to the conclusions, you know, straight to the been there's and seen that's of the adult mind. Oh, I know what this is, so I don't have to engage with it.
Well, I found it very interesting when I started learning about flow, because I realized I found, I think it was maybe Freakonomics or something like that. Okay. They mentioned it. Somewhere I heard about Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and then I was just like, okay, let me read the source code here. Let me go to his book, and read that, and then I read a few other things, and I started realizing I'm actually a flow junkie, and I didn't know that. And for me, I spent 10,000 hours, I added it up one time, 10,000 hours working in factories and warehouses as a teen into my early 20s to pay for school and all the things I needed. Every summer I'd work 12-hour days every day to do this, and every time I would go in, I knew how to access flow state. And my body, I actually thought like this, there's different types of jobs out there. One of the types of jobs is like this, where your body has to be really busy, but your mind can do anything it wants.
Sure.
And so I got very creative. I wrote songs, I wrote philosophies, you know, I was reading books at my break and then digesting them while I'm doing my work. And I was in flow for a huge amount of the time. So I realized that was actually the value of all the factory work, you know, not the wear and tear on my body. But it was a beautiful way where I knew the only way I could really get through this, because it was pretty tough, was to zone out in a sense, or to entertain myself in my mind. And I was accessing flow state. For you, what are your, and so like the Olympic athlete that needs to find flow on demand at various high pressure points, the UFC fighter, the different people that need to do what they do.
Sure.
How do you reliably access flow state?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things that Kotler says is, you know, it's interesting when you describe what happened to you in the factory, it almost sounds like you got your body on autopilot mode and it actually freed your mind to do other things, which is, I think maybe your mind was in flow doing other things while your body was automatically doing the work in the factory. But it doesn't seem like the work in the factory itself was flow.
No, the muscle memory.
That was muscle memory.
Took care of everything.
Yeah, but what Kotler will say is that flow typically follows focus. And so what you're looking for are things that heighten your focus. And one of the things that reliably heightens focus is novelty and risk. When they talk about risk, is you want enough risk to get you engaged, paying attention, raise the stakes a little bit, but not so much risk that you're overwhelmed by anxiety, because that's no fun. Too little risk or too much monotony leads to boredom. That's why Csikszentmihalyi describes flow as a state beyond boredom and anxiety, which are the two states of mind that human beings normally oscillate in. You know, like anxiety about the future, what's gonna happen, or boredom, lethargy, you know, trapped in the past, longing for the past, the present doesn't compare with the past, etc. And so, for me, one of the ways of reliably inducing flow is putting myself in a highly novel situation. So travel is huge. Going to a place I've never been to heighten the possibility of my expectations being violated, so that I can be like, because, you know, I'm guilty of predicting what's going to happen too. Like we all can succumb to jadedness. Like you land somewhere new and the airport's kind of crummy and you're like, oh, I know what this is, you know, or getting excited and then having your expectations disappointed. In either case, I'm looking to have my expectations violated by something that exceeds my expectations. So if the past overdetermines the present, I'm looking for a present that supersedes the past.
Right. And do you use triggers, like just to set up when you're doing a video or something like that?
So going to novel places is huge. Getting enough sleep is
novel
also
place. So for your videos, you try to pick a novel place?
I try to go to a novel place, or to go to a novel place where I can have a novel experience, and then the videos can be the reflection or the integration. So travel is a huge one. Sleep is huge for me also, because if there's fatigue, I find it a lot harder to be present, because normally when I haven't slept well, I'm ruminating about how tired I am. So what I want is to my biological systems to be taken care of. So I want to sleep well, I want to eat just enough, not so much that I'm full, not too little that I'm hungry, have enough coffee, so that the system is operating so well that I'm not even aware of the system. And that facilitates being present. Something else that works really well is cannabis. Mild to moderate amounts of cannabis, which of course now is legal in California and other places.
And where I live as well, in Canada.
Yeah, Canada. So cannabis works really well, especially in low to moderate doses, because as we know, it sharpens your senses, so it makes you much more present. In Michael Pollan's account of cannabis, he says that you attain a kind of virginal noticing of the sensate world, or that sense of first sight unencumbered by knowingness. And it does that, I think, by playing with short-term memory. Now, typically that's used as a side effect of cannabis to sort of demonize it and say, it affects your short-term memory, but it's not really like that you're like, forget like who you are, but it's more that, like, let's say if you're going for a walk in nature and you are mildly buzzed on some cannabis, and it's like a beautiful windy road, let's say. What'll happen is you'll find yourself really present, and as you walk, you're really present. Every couple of steps, you'll catch up with yourself and you'll be like, wow, look where I am. And then you feel like you've walked for like an hour, because you can't like necessarily remember the last two curves you took. And so you're always at the astounding frontier of the present. You're always at the edge. You're not predicting what's about to happen because the signal's been blocked, the forward signal's been blocked, and you've forgotten where you've just been because the backward signals is blocked. So you're more present. And that's a very, very good optimal arousal zone from which to engage with ideas. because when you're asked a question, you're really regarding what you're being asked. You're not just automatically going to your pre-thought answer that you normally have to get around, your set of algorithms that you reliably use to manage your relationship with the world. You're actually thrust into a place where you're so present that everything that comes at you is going to be engaged with in a deeper fashion. There's a kind of increased suggestibility to the signals from within and from without. So you want to be in a safe environment. You want to be in a reverential environment. Nature works really well. Novel places work really well because they're already new, plus your eyes are more open. And you enter a kind of Platonic perspective, the realm of the romantic poet. You know, you in those moments understand Blake when he talked about seeing the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, infinity in the palm of your hand, eternity in an hour. And in that state of mind, it's a good state of mind to be like, all right, cool. Let's roll the camera and let's engage with these ideas. You know, things will emerge simply because you're paying attention. And so that, I find that works really well. Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler have this funny line about the hippie speedball. The hippie speedball is a good sleep, 20 minutes of aerobic exercise, a shot of espresso, and a joint to get flow. That's the hippie speedball for flow. So.
Well, and I find with these, let's call them peak experiences, whether it's in meditation or it's in a heightened state or an altered state, the idea of an altered state is that it's not where you live.
Right.
So, and the pursuit is really to live there. And so I see these as beautiful, almost like advertisements for the way we can be present. You know, and there's something in themselves that's beautiful, but also it calls you to like, how do I integrate this? I want to be at flow at work all day. I want to be in flow when I'm talking with my friends and not be paranoid about myself or too self-conscious and things like that. And it seems to be something difficult, but the neurochemistry is addictive, flow.
Very much so, but we also have these natural flow cycles, and we can also have like flow fatigue, and we have to also have like recuperation time.
It's one of 5 brain states, and all 5 are needed for different types of things.
Sure, I mean, you know, it's been said that people who figure out what their flow triggers are and build their lives around those flow triggers report the highest incidences of life satisfaction of any other people. So with flow, it's a state of mind that's like north of happy. Like you don't want happiness. What you want is flow, reliable access to flow. The risk, however, is to become a flow junkie or a bliss junkie, because then you get hooked on the state instead of raising the stage. That's a line that Jamie Wheel uses. So he thinks of our self systems as essentially like colanders. So we're like full of holes, right? So you can pour flow and you can temporarily fill your colander, but you're always leaking. If there was a way to change your colander into a chalice, change your self systems, you know, again, instead of getting hooked on the state, you would raise the stage. Then the chalice, man, you can render yourself not just whole, but holy. And how do you do that? Maybe it's through meditation. Maybe it's through breathing exercises. Maybe it's through better architecture and better design. You know, if we design cities for flow, if we work together with psychologists and architects to study the effects, the cognitive impact of built environments, if we change the language that we use in describing experiences, because, you know, language isn't just descriptive, it's generative. So, you know, it could be mantras, it could be architecture, it could be the music we listen to, it could be exercise routines, it could be diet, to get ourselves primed for more flow. But even having said that, my intuition is that, shit, man, you know, when you get into a jacuzzi, the best part of getting into a jacuzzi is the first 10 minutes or so, because of the juxtaposition or the shift from one state to another. Sometimes the best part of flow is just the moment in which you realize you're entering flow. If that became your baseline all the time, I don't know if we would be able to recognize or appreciate it, simply because we require juxtaposition to know anything.
Right.
To know cold, you have to know hot. But people like David Pierce, who wrote The Hedonistic Imperative, thinks that, well, we're just getting started. If we elevate our baseline, it also will elevate our ecstasies. So peak experiences will still exist as exceptions to the rule. But if we can elevate our baseline so that day-to-day reality is still pretty flowy, it still leaves room for ecstatic states, you know, beyond the self. But at least when you wake up in the morning, you won't be struggling. When you're showering and brushing your teeth and doing whatever, you'll feel really relaxed. When you're reading articles in the morning, you'll actually get into them, you know? So I think that it's kind of like we can aspire to move everything up, you know, baseline, make it a little higher, and then ecstasy will go even, you know, beyond.
Yeah, my wife is a poet, and she loves social activists as well. She loves getting into flow because it actually changes her physiology. She has digestion issues sometimes, and it fixes them. Every single time she sits down and does free writes, it fixes her digestive problems. And so there's
fixes my existential problems.
Right, there's a number of things that it seems to help. When we talk about creativity, so let's go into creativity a little bit more. How do you see that as a little bit unique? Where does it come from?
Yeah.
You know, what is it? Where does it come from?
It's interesting that she says that your wife says that being creative and being in flow fixes her digestive problems. You know, so many of our physical ailments are psychosomatic. Can be rooted in psychological issues. You know, not to dismiss real physical pathologies, but often anxiety can lead to physical symptoms. I think existential distress can manifest in physical symptoms. The gut and the brain are very related, so digestion issues can often be emotional. I'm not saying that's her case, but it's very possible. And so it makes sense that mental spaces or experiences that really satiate us psychologically can provide relief from many of our ailments. I know for me, the creative process definitely absolves me of my existential itches and existential anxiousness. Ernest Becker is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. He wrote a book called The Denial of Death. And those who have seen my interviews will no doubt, you know, be like, okay, here we go again, because I always talk about this book. But the key idea is that the root cause, the worm at the core of all of our neurosis, all of our anxiety, all of our disquiet is simply being mortal. You know, it's sort of an unbearable weight to carry on our shoulders, to be able to contemplate the infinite, to write poems the way we write, to do art the way we make, the way we, you know, the capacities that we have that seem like metaphysical, spiritual, divine, and to be coupled with a body that ages and that withers away, it kind of creates an unbearable tension for the human animal. And one of the things that Becker says about the creative process is that it's one potentially healthy response to the decrepitude of our situation, in the sense that, like, both the artist and the neurotic, he says, are highly sensitive beings. They both take on more than they can chew. They're both overwhelmed by the existential reality of our condition. But the neurotic is precisely the one who cannot create. And so he chokes on his introversions, you know. The artist similarly takes in the world and is overwhelmed by it, but then he reworks it into an active work project. And it's doing that acts as a kind of exorcism that alleviates us of that digestive disquiet that potentially is just rooted in the fact that, holy shit, time is passing and every day is the youngest you're ever gonna be. I mean, I don't like to think about that because it makes me depressed. And so I try to connect with my art and to lose myself and to have experiences of flow, which again, provide relief from the rumination and the monkey mind and potentially even the self-awareness.
Yeah, the self-editing shuts right off in your brain, so the self-criticism does as well.
Correct. And time loses its oppressive nature as well. The tyranny of time is absolved when the parts of the brain that measure time are turned offline. So when you're in flow, the sense of self, which is the sense that you are mortal, go away. The sense of time, which is tyrannical, time is running out, go away. There's a sense of effortless labor in whatever creative project you're doing. And finally, there's a kind of richness of information, access to insight that goes through the roof. So it's a beautiful monk-like, saint-like, poet-like reverie that you enter into flow. The forever box, some people call it. In the context of romantic love, it's like you step off the people mover that's carrying everyone else towards death, and you're like a god outside of time, commingling with another, commingling with your lover, commingling with your art in a realm beyond time. And so, of course, it fixes your digestive issues. I could have not, you know.
Well, in creativity, let's talk about ideas.
Yeah.
Similarly, I believe ideas are real. That's something I've learned from my wife. She thinks metaphors are real.
Yeah,
and,
I think so too.
And that the world gets very confused when they don't understand that.
I know.
Which, can you tell me about your perspective on ideas being real?
Yeah, man.
Even like neurologically, and then the idea of like, where are these ideas coming from?
Totally. I mean, Richard Dawkins talks about the meme as the new replicator. That we went from genes to memes. You know, we used to spread information through our genes, and now we spread information through memes. And he says ideas, I did a video about this called Radical Openness back in 2012. The idea was that ideas are just as real as the neurons they inhabit. Ideas have infectivity. Ideas have spreading power. Ideas leap from brain to brain, and they compete for the limited resources of our attention. And even though ideas are not made of nucleic acid, they have achieved more evolutionary change and at a rate that leaves the old gene panting far behind. So are ideas real? Absolutely yes. They're shaking the world with their quaking, annihilating glory. You know.
And so if ideas are one of the most fast evolving parts of life, if you were to take these ideas and build them on an exponential technology scale, that's where it seems to be like a lot of the people listening are building these things, like coming up with crazy ideas, and they're testing them, whether it's a 14-year-old kid solving pancreatic cancer with a crazy idea he works up in his garage, or whether it's a single mom in Zambia with a mobile phone connection figuring out how to use it to help her family, her community, and her country.
Yeah, well, I've always said, human beings, I think it was Ray Kurzweil at the end of Singularity is Near that said that our ability to create virtual models in our heads, which are ideas, virtual realities, in combination with our modest-looking thumb, was sufficient to create a secondary force of evolution called technology, and that it will continue until the entire universe is at our fingertips, right? And so, ideas in combination with our capacity to externalize or actualize those ideas is kind of the human story. We build a tool, and then the tool builds us, and so on and so forth. And so that's kind of fact. What I think is happening now with the kind of exponential progress we're seeing with our technology is first of all, our technologies are ideas literalized. They are the embodiment and literalization of our imagination and our ideas. Technology is the human mind turned inside out. And as these technologies get exponentially more powerful, the construction kits to make real what is in our imagination speeds exponentially. So it's like what we're doing is shrinking the lag time, shrinking the buffer time between what we can imagine and what we can create. I've said this in my videos. David Deutsch's book, The Beginning of Infinity, tackles these kinds of ideas. And so let's say the example from this New York Times review of his book was that if you take the topography of any great city, Manhattan, let's say, that's a physical topography, right? That is shaped more by mind and creativity and intent, essentially imagination, than by geology. Not a metaphor. Like that's not a poetic statement. That's like a statement of fact. So mind trumps matter. Mind has more of an impact on the topography of something like New York than geology does. So consciousness is a geological force. So mind, ideas are a geological force. Whoa, like we're way beyond metaphors now, you know what I mean? And so even taking that further, it makes you wonder, so what are we, right? Like Sagan said, we are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
And there's the idea of where is mind. We don't have to go too far into it, but it's just the idea that, they keep looking for it in the brain and they can't find it.
I know. Yeah, I mean, I get troubled with this question because I do have a very materialist view when it comes to death, in the sense that I struggle with people aging and dying, and where do they go? At least individuated people seem to dissipate when they die, and that is unbearable to me. But from a larger vantage point, like even Terence McKenna, he describes the human enterprise as a coral reef-like animal, or an extruder of technological material, or a novelty engendering engine, in that we take matter of low organization and we put it through our mental filters, and then we extrude space shuttles and iPhones. I mean, that's like what's going on here. Like, what the fuck, like we seem to have this capacity to absorb materials, and we are a sort of anti-entropic force. We're exotropic. Not just life being exotropic in that it moves towards greater complexity in organizations, single-celled organisms into multicellular organisms, so on and so forth, but also human agency, human imagination, like takes simple things and makes them more complex and sublime and transcendent. And so that seems to be like what we are. That's the phenomenon that we seem to be. And I think that when we start directing those capacities mindfully and with agency towards ourselves, maybe we'll get to, absolve ourselves from mortality. I mean, I hope so at least. Because it feels to me like that's like the end goal would be to divinize ourselves. And granted, people say, we're already divine beings, just meditate, look within, take psychedelics, realize you are God. I'm like, yes, fair enough. Sure, we are divine. I mean, look at what we've achieved. Yes, but still everyone dies. And so I need some way to resolve that.
My favorite idea, beliefs became very heavy for me in the past. So I like ideas a lot better than beliefs.
Interesting.
And I hold them very tight and sometimes, which becomes close to a belief, and maybe subconsciously it does affect my behavior. Wow. But the idea of ideas, like I know you're a huge fan of ideas. Yeah. And you can hold many ideas that are contradictory at the same time.
Correct.
So it's the idea that and people around you likely get very confused. What do you believe? You said this and then you said this. Those are two different ideas. It's like, yeah, they are. And they're beautiful. And maybe like the idea of free will and, determinism or something like that, or destiny. There's certain things that we don't know how they connect, but you can hold both at the same time. Like railroad tracks, I heard an old theologian say one time, he said they're like railroad tracks that connect somewhere in the distance, but we don't know how. Like the perspective, looking at the railroad tracks, these two things connect in the future, but we can't quite tell how and where.
That's brilliant.
But the thing that I wanted to say about the ideas, about connecting the idea of the mind or consciousness with the idea of the soul, in a lot of religions and things like that, they seem to be very similar in some ways. And the best idea that I don't know if I came up with part of this and mixed it with something I read somewhere or something like that, but the best idea that I hold recently is the idea that there's in a particle, I love the fractal nature of everything.
Transcalar patterns, The
microscope down, telescope up, that there's a fractal nature to life. And when I study technology, my favorite definition of technology is that it is the stuff that holds together
everything.
Natural phenomenon.
Right.
So it harnesses
technology
natural phenomena.
Nature too,
Yeah, so if we look at nature, I've been studying nature very closely for the last while to understand technology, because the reason certain technologies work is because it already worked in nature.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
They've figured out how to leverage, a number of different things nature does. But so here's the idea. The particle, what is it? A small percentage of it is matter. Maybe 1% or a few percent. What if the soul was the other 99%? What if the other 99% in all of living things was the actual thing that holds everything together? In the particle, in the body, in everything else. And then the question becomes, who's the I? Is it I, the matter, or is it I, the rest of it?
Yeah.
And so when you say, I am divine, I am God, I can live forever, maybe you're referring to the soul, which is the energy that's eternal. And that's where science and those types of ideas start to combine and get a little weird. But if we take back our judgments on what's right or wrong or true or false, just the idea is pretty cool that the soul itself is eternal if you just call it energy.
True.
Energy can't be created and it can't be destroyed. And so if we were to identify with that energy, we'd be free of that problem.
No, I hear you, man. I mean, I love hearing you. I actually have never heard it phrased so eloquently. I love ideas more than beliefs, because I often say that I'm very scared of ideology, because ideology ends up being militant to belief, or extremism of any sort. And if you drink too much of one Kool-Aid, if you become cloaked in one ideology, you can't be a free thinker anymore. And so it's interesting. I like ideas more than beliefs. I feel like I need to make a video about that. Like, thank you. Ideas more than beliefs. And as a matter of fact, when you're an ideas person rather than a belief person, one of the hallmarks of a mystical experience, which is a spiritual experience occasioned often by psychedelics or meditation where people see the divine, one of the hallmarks of a mystical experience is paradoxicality. an ability to hold multiple ideas in mind at once, seemingly that contradict each other, and to be able to accept the possibility of both. So how is it possible that a person having a mystical experience, which supposedly is associated with belief, can actually hold multiple ideas in mind at once? Now, the hallmark of a mystical experience is not belief, but paradoxicality and holding multiple ideas in mind at once. So perhaps the most fervent believers, the ideologues, should realize that true illumination, true mystical experience is one that can actually hold multiple perspectives, multiple ideas, paradoxical, contradictory ideas, and accept the possibility of all of them. You know, that's maybe more enlightened, I think, than clinging to beliefs that are self-serving.
The people that I like to read in philosophical or religious circles, they're all the mystics. So it's the people that went beyond the dogma and started, and they were scary people for those religions, whether they're Sufis or like Rumi, or whether it's Christian mystics or different people like that. They're going beyond, and they're going into something, and they found like whatever flow, ecstasy. They found that, and it led them a little bit beyond what they knew then, and they can write things.
That's right.
You know, thousands of years ago that we are still figuring out right now. They tapped into something. You know, even like I've read. My wife and I had an amazing talk while walking through a forest one time about the collective consciousness, just because we read someone's work. I forget who it was. It was a great poet, but it was hundreds of years ago. And the person was supposedly in their regular life very like the society. But in their writing, these things would come out all about human rights, way beyond what anyone in the current society was talking about. And we were just talking like, where is the evidence for this collective consciousness? Like, is that one little piece? Is that something that we could look at? Is like people saying things that don't make any contextual sense to when they said it, and then the reality coming at a different time? Like that's where the fourth dimension gets a little tricky with time.
Yeah, or simultaneous inventions is another one of those phenomenons. So Stephen Johnson, in his book Where Good Ideas Come From, A Natural History of Innovation, says that, like, you know, right around the time that Darwin came up with his main theories, that there was like 2 or 3 other guys around the world that were on the cusp of coming up with the same idea, or maybe even wrote it down before but didn't publish it. And there's all these examples in history that it just feels like maybe when something is in the ether, an idea needs to be born, it has multiple hosts, multiple host brains, you know, and maybe that means that it is in the collective ocean, you know. I mean, Carl Jung obviously talks about collective consciousness. You know, it's and as we build, there's poetry there. It definitely is compelling. I want to be fully convinced. You know, I'm fascinated by the idea of it. I don't know if I have certainty, but I definitely am compelled and I'm open. To that notion. Because I mean, it's a lot of like it's very Twilight Zone-ish that whenever some big breakthrough is about to happen or happens, there was multiple people on the cusp of the same thing. Like, how's that possible?
Well, and it tends to be like in science, those things get excluded very easily when they don't fit the conventions of the dogma.
So it's called scientism, they call that, right?
Scientism.
When science itself becomes almost like a belief system.
Right, and it's the immune response, as Salim Ismail talks about the immune response of big organizations against innovation. It's the immune response of the scientific community against those trying to create something new. It's natural,
for sure.
But if we want to progress, we have to figure out how to deal with that.
Absolutely.
So we could talk a lot about that, but I wanted to wrap up on a question. If you could upload, so think about the people listening, they're entrepreneurs, they're scaling companies, they're trying to create impact in the world through their companies. They see profit as fuel for the mission, not as the mission itself. And they're wanting to figure out, well, they're doing a lot there, and there's a lot of information. And what we love is curating the best information and giving it away. So if you had something that you could help them, if you could upload knowledge to this community, what do you think they need to know? Because it's
people who are trying to scale, and if I could upload knowledge,
trying to solve humanity's biggest problems through technology companies. It's a risky feat. If they don't get it right, there's a lot of damage. If they do, there's a lot of abundance. What do they need to know?
Well, it's worth taking a shot. And the reason it's worth taking a shot, even from a human psychology perspective, is that if you play it safe and you make a decent living and you buy the house and the car and things are good and you have your material needs taken care of, that will not satiate you. In fact, depression is higher in places in which people are more well off. So base needs, base financial and material needs won't satiate you. Meaning and a noble aim, Jordan Peterson in Canada talks about the importance of the noble aim. It's something just beyond your grasp that you orient your life around. That will keep you going. That will get you out of bed in the morning. So it's worth taking a shot for something that you truly believe in that can make a difference. Because even if you do it, if in the end you don't even know if you'll achieve, just the fact that you're trying, I think will satiate the fire in the belly that base material wealth will not. You're mortal, at least for now, at least it looks that way. And so you have a finite amount of time to do something significant that every day allows you freedom from the burden of your mortality. And it tends to be that cosmic heroes are those that lend their lives to something larger than themselves. And so if I could upload one thing to people who are on the fence about whether or not they should tackle a project that could impact the world in a positive way, I say fuck yes. And also realize that the tools and technologies we have at hand are the kinds that could scale to reach 1 billion people in a positive way much easier than at any other time in human history. So the new billionaire, as I've said in video content and others have said, is that the one who positively touches 1 billion people. So aspire to that, like aim for the fucking stars. You might land on the moon, so to speak.
Exactly. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We take every listener to this podcast very seriously, and we'd love to keep in touch with you directly. So please subscribe to our Scaling Impact community by subscribing to our email list at exv.ai/podcast. That's exv.ai/podcast.